There's been a lot of discussion this week over the OQLF's directives, part of Bill 96, the language directives being now administered to hospitals, social service centers across this province. We took a lot of calls on this for the past couple of days, and one of the questions that was routinely asked was, where's the federal government on this? How can this be? This idea that even though we've been assured by the premier, and perhaps it's worth playing that clip back again, I don't know. This is 2 years ago. This is May of 2022 when Francois Legault said this.
I want to be very clear. There's no change at all in the actual situation of services given to Anglophones and immigrants in English in our healthcare system.
That's what he said then. That's also what Jean-François Robert, the language minister, said just about a week ago. But that's not, in fact, what's happening. What is happening, and we know this now because the OQLF admitted it was happening, there is a new directive. It's being taken to hospitals and to social service centers like CHSLDs, where it is telling people working there who and how they get to speak to someone in English. Question, as I said, from many of you is, where's the federal government? Well, this morning we heard from the federal government, Anna Gainey, Liberal MP, NDG, Westmount, coming out and suggesting, urging, if that's the right word, the federal health minister, Mark Holland, to stand up and do something about this because it seems a violation of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Anna Gainey is on the line. Anna, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Aaron. Nice to be here.
So I guess the first question is, okay, this happened. I asked one of our guests, Jim Meny, a couple of minutes ago, why did we not hear directly from the health minister at the time, as opposed to having heard from a couple of MPs that they're asking the health minister to get involved?
I can't speak for why the health minister has or hasn't spoken up at this point. What I can speak to is my experience in my riding and what I've heard from constituents, a number of them who have been calling and emailing and reaching out and looking for clarification in what feels like a very confusing situation on a matter that is of the utmost importance to Canadians, which is their health care. So that is why I took the time to reach out and have some conversations with people and try to understand the impact of these guidelines on constituents in particular.
So what are you asking for the health minister to do?
Well, I think that we need to take the time to understand the guidelines and get through this confusion and get to the bottom of, to your point and the quotes you played earlier, about what's been said and what's been committed to, and that we're prepared to ensure that those guidelines are in line with those statements. And then if not, if there's a role for Ottawa there to uphold the principles of the Canada Health Act in this context, that it's important that we are following this file and this issue, and that we're prepared to speak to it and address it if need be.
You know, some people would ask, why now? Why have we waited up until this point? These directives have been out for a while. They were obviously in Bill 96. Why now? Is this just based on people, as you just said, reaching out to you in your writing saying something has to be done?
Well, I first read about the directives, I believe, in the Gazette. And I think that in that first article I saw, the directives had come into the Health and Social Services Network around July 18th. So this was guidelines and input that the sector had been looking for in terms of how to implement Bill 96. And so that had been received, and then we started to hear from the sector, from people within the sector who had a chance to read the guidelines, their reaction to it. And then the reporting began. And so the timing really flows from that for me, which is, you know, as people read about it in the Gazette or heard about it here on your show, they reach out to our offices, probably Anthony's as well, and my other colleagues, and start to ask questions. So, you know, that is how the timing has evolved on my side anyway.
Can you just clarify, when you say you've heard from constituents, is there a general consensus? What are they concerned about or upset most about?
I think they're most concerned about access to healthcare in their maternal language, which, as we know, in my particular constituency or riding, we have a very large population of people who don't have French as a first language. Seniors in particular are very concerned when you layer in this notion that perhaps they need to have their school certificate, that, you know, they didn't need that certificate. They didn't go to school in that time. They don't have that. My father would come into that category. He doesn't have an English language certificate. Does that mean that there's a barrier to health care in English in Quebec? So I think ultimately people are confused, and it's often our most vulnerable who are confused, and also people working in the system as well. Like, there's just a lot of questions. So unfortunately, and I think this was pointed out by others in the media reporting that's been going on, is that the document seems to have generated more questions and more confusion than it's clarified with respect to how Bill 96 impacts the sector.
So just as a final question, I kind of asked this, I just want to get clarification.
Sure.
I use the word urged the federal health minister to take a look at this. How would you characterize it? What are you asking him to do?
Well, I'm asking him to read the guidelines and to have a conversation, ideally, with his department and the people who are experts on this. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an expert on the Canada Health Act or the Quebec Health Act, but my constituents are concerned. They've raised concerns with me that I think are legitimate. They are being reported as well in the media, and I think it's important that we get to the bottom of it. The government of Canada is a major partner in the delivery of healthcare in this country, and so I think that we have to be in that space and be aware and be there to ensure that Canadians get the kind of health care that they expect and deserve.
Okay. I want to go to Anthony Housefather, who's also on the line, Liberal MP from Mount Royal. Anthony, you along with Anna have both come out and suggested this needs to be, we need to take a closer look at this. Do you share the same opinion here?
Oh, I agree completely with Anna. I mean, there are two issues here that are both important. The first is that, as you remember, Aaron, I was very much against Law 96, and one of the reasons, amongst many, was the idea that in Law 96 it says that only people with English eligibility certificates or those who arrived in the last 6 months are entitled to English services. And as you correctly pointed out, 2 years ago there was an uproar about this in the health sector, and Premier Legault and Christian Dubé made very clear at the time that they did not believe that Law 96 applied to the health sector. But this directive makes very clear that the only people that are absolutely entitled to English language services are the people who fall under the exceptions under Law 96, and it comes up with all these hypotheticals that explain when somebody who is not entitled automatically to English health services should be allowed to in an emergency situation or in different situations. So it's clear the directive does not comply with what the Premier and Dubé said 2 years ago, and they need to come out and they need to clarify that right away. Because right now, in the same way that Anna is hearing from people, I've been speaking to seniors groups, and in particular, they are very concerned.
By the way, I will point this out. Eric Maldoff pointed this out yesterday when we were talking about this, suggesting we've been talking about hospitals and getting service in hospitals. This applies across the healthcare spectrum, whether you're in a CHSLD or anywhere else.
To across the spectrum, although I would point out that it does seem to create an exception for those institutions that are designated as bilingual under the law. So, for example, the Jewish General Hospital, the MUHC, they seem to have a general permission to deliver services in both languages.
To that point, I had heard that discussion as well. I know they had bilingual status, and I'm hearing now that is even in question as well.
Well, I think it's not. There's a couple of institutions that weren't carried over onto a list. I believe that the Santa Cabrini is one of them. But certainly the ones that are designated English-French bilingual, I read again, it's not clear, but I read the directive as saying that there's an exception there. But again, the directive I don't think is clear. I think it creates more questions and confusion than anything, which is why Quebec needs to clarify this. And if Quebec does not clarify explicitly that you don't need to carry a certificate that you can't get, as Anna pointed out, her dad, my mom, others, anybody who went to school before 1977 doesn't have a certificate, and you can't get a certificate. So that's issue number one. And issue number two, if somebody comes from the Philippines and prefers to get served in English in a healthcare institution, it's absurd that they can't if the service is available in English. So these things need to be clarified, and if they aren't, I've always said the federal government has an obligation to defend minority communities in Quebec, including the English-speaking minority, and this would be one case where I would fight very hard, along with my colleague Anna and others, for us to do so.
It's all well and good to hear that, and I'm sure that to some degree makes people feel a little bit better, because I said when we started the interview, many people asked, rightly so perhaps, where is the federal government on this? Well, now we both heard you weigh in. I'm wondering, are you concerned by the fact that the provincial government, even now, roughly a week later, has not sought to clarify this?
Yes, I am concerned. I would like to hear from Minister Dubé, not the language minister, Minister Roberts, but the health minister, because this is about health services. I believe everything I've ever heard about Mr. Dubé is he's a reasonable guy and he's an efficient minister. And I hope he's taking the time to look at the directive, to look at what was said 2 years ago, and to come out with a clarification that this directive is not fulfilling what the CAC promised 2 years ago, which is that there's no change in the health sector, because otherwise none of this directive is actually required.
I would also try to understand, given the fact that you're asking for the federal health minister, for Mark Holland, to get involved, what is the next step here? What has to happen next? What is he expected to do?
Well, I think the first step is Quebec needs to clarify. There's nothing for the federal government to do as long as healthcare services are available, as was promised 2 years ago.
Yeah, but those directives say otherwise.
No, but that's where Quebec needs to clarify that. In the event that English language services are available under Quebec law at a bilingual institution or in a healthcare sector designated under Law 142, which is regional access plans, and people are entitled to get services in English there, and person A can get the service, but person B has refused it because they don't have a school certificate, then I believe, in my view, and just like Anna, this is not my area of legal expertise. I'm a lawyer, but this is not my specialty. I believe there's an arguable case that it violates the accessibility provisions of the Canada Health Act, and I would like to see our government at that point get involved and start discussing this with Quebec. Of course, as well as I've heard many attorneys now say, in the event that Quebec proceeds with this, there's also actions that can be taken by any individual denied service in English, which could be both constitutional and under the provisions of the Canada Health Act.
I'm going to leave it at that. Anna, I will ask you one thing if you're still there. Have you actually had any discussions with the health minister on this?
Yeah, I called him and told him, that I needed to talk to him about this, and I needed to, understand and get back to my constituents, and I needed the help of him or his department to understand this complex terrain and the jurisdiction issues on all of these things. So he's very responsive. I think he knows it's something that we need to get more clarity on, and I agree with Anthony. The clarification really needs to come from the government of Quebec first and foremost. And, we need to do that promptly because people are worried.
I think we just lost that line. Okay. Anthony, are you still there?
I am, okay. Aaron, but I agree. People are worried. And we need to
Okay.
do what we can to assuage those concerns, and Quebec's got to clarify so that everybody can move forward and understand what actions need to be taken. Quebec needs to say what it plans to do.
Anthony Housefather, Anna Gainey, thank you both. Appreciate the time this afternoon.
Thank you, Aaron.